In this drawing, we're going to learn how to create value on a cylinder. You're going to need a couple of things to begin. Number 2 pencil, an ebony pencil, a vinyl eraser, a pencil sharpener, a kneaded eraser, a blending stump, and a tissue. Once you have all your materials and you're sitting in front of the cylinder, what you should notice is that there is an ellipse on the top of the cylinder, and technically the cylinder is going to have parallel lines. And if I look at the drawing that I made here, my lines aren't quite parallel, so I'm going to make sure that I true those up. And notice how I'm drawing very lightly with my number 2 pencil. That is on purpose so that when I'm doing value later, I can correct any mistakes that I make. As I was doing this too, if you'll notice the bottom of the ellipse on the top of the cylinder should be the same arc on the bottom of the cylinder. I'm going to then take my eraser and erase any problem areas that I have here, and I can actually see that this arc needs to go up this direction just a little bit. I'm going to erase this bottom part. Then I can actually see where the table intersects the cylinder, so it's up like this. Then I'm going to actually go and draw my shadow in, and I can see that the shadow gets larger as it moves away. If you look at the shape of the shadow, technically it gets a little bit larger as it moves away from the cylinder. Then I'm going to actually put the umbra in. The umbra, again, is that darkest part of the shadow that's right behind the object, and often in the classroom it creates kind of like a triangle in the shadow. As I'm looking at my cylinder too, I can see that I've got a little bit of a mistake here, so I'm actually going to go back and try to fix that before I start putting value in. And there I've got my cylinder blocked in. One other thing I need to analyze is I need to make sure that this ellipse, it should actually be in quarters. It should actually be equal, because if you think of dividing a circle in half, a circle would be equal on all 4 sides. So if I actually look at this, you can see that my quadrants here on that ellipse are pretty much equal. I could probably make this top arc just a little bit more narrow on that side, and then I'm going to go and erase this side of the cylinder. If it's a little bit hard for you to see the lines that are here, that's okay. They're going to become more clear as we put value into this drawing. I am going to go and erase that division just because I have to actually be able to put value there. And it's very difficult to put value on something when there are lines in the way that could be too dark. So here I have my cylinder, and the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to color in the umbra, and I'm also going to color in the background with that number 9 value that we had talked about before. And part of the reason that I'm going to do that is it's going to create automatic contrast almost immediately. You can see the difference between the darkest value and a white, which is with the lightest value that we have going on there. One thing that you do have to be careful of is you do have to make sure that your initial drawing was correct before you do this, because once you go in really, really dark, you're not going to be able to erase. So again, if you take a look at my initial drawing, I drew with a number 2 pencil when I initially blocked in or drew the outlines of this drawing. And now I'm going to start to add value. So I am pressing pretty hard with this ebony pencil as I do the umbra. And I'm again going to do the same thing when I do the background. One of the other first things that I'm going to do is I'm going to again take my tissue and I'm going to rub that value together so that my value starts to get really, really blended. And I can also take that same value and start rubbing it into the rest of the shadow, and it's creating probably like, I want to say it's probably like a number 4 or a 5 value, because I'm pressing kind of hard, but I'm not pressing really hard, and I'm also going to have to do another layer if I want it to get darker. One other thing I want you guys to notice is my sketchbook got bent because I stuffed it into my bag and the edge of the sketchbook got bent, and there's actually a line created right here that I don't really like. So I'm going to have to go back in there eventually and figure out how to remove that error in my drawing. But I'm going to save that for a little bit later, and I'm going to turn my sketchbook actually upside down so that I can get closer to where the background is, where I'm trying to add value. So I'm going to go right against the table, and I'm going to go again parallel to that table line that I drew, and I'm going to put as much value as I can onto the background. And I'm pressing pretty hard with my ebony pencil again. And as I get closer to my cylinder, it does get a little bit lighter because I'm picking up the pressure that I'm using, but I'm also trying to not cross that initial outline that I drew. So I'm being really careful not to go against and over top of the line where I don't want to create value. So I'm going in another different direction, and partly that's to add more value to my drawing. I do not actually have to have value all the way to the top. The examples that you guys see on the display board actually have the value all the way to the top edge. That's not totally necessary. The one thing that we do want to do though is we don't want to create basically a dark aura around this cylinder, or just like a dark halo is kind of what I call it, either dark aura or dark halo. And I am going to go right to the edges of my paper, and then eventually I am going to take my tissue and I'm going to blend this together. And you can actually see as I take my tissue, it's actually pulling some of that value back off the paper. So it is going to be necessary to do this value several times. And I'm going to do that, but I'm probably going to speed up the video so that this video doesn't take forever in order for you to see everything. Another thing that's really important to note is that when I go against an outer edge, I really want like as sharp a point on my pencil as I can get it, and I'm actually using the sharpest part of the pencil tip. On that video, it doesn't look like my pencil's that sharp, but I'm actually really being careful to watch where the sharpest part of my pencil is so that when I go on the edges of my cylinder, I don't accidentally create something that is blurry. And hopefully you notice already, I got a little bit of value over here, which actually is going to be okay because my light source is coming from this side, so I want this edge of my cylinder to stay as white as possible, and that's going to have some value on it anyway, so I'm not going to like worry about the fact that I got some value there. So I'm going to just take my pencil and I'm going to pull some value all the way to the top here, and I am going horizontally right now, and hopefully you noticed too, as I was going next to the cylinder, I switched directions and I did go vertically there for a minute. But one thing you are going to have to do with your pencil in order to create a unified drawing, basically what a unified drawing means is that the marks or the colors are repeated in multiple sections so that it looks like the whole drawing goes together. It's sort of like putting an outfit together where you want, similar colors throughout what you're wearing, or if you're doing a presentation for some kind of class, you would want to have the same colors throughout whatever presentation you're doing to make it look nice and neat. Because again, art is about making things, oftentimes it's about making things look beautiful or showing some sort of communicative idea, and we want to make sure that we're presenting things and putting our best foot forward. So as I'm finished putting the value in there, I'm just going to take my tissue again and I'm going to rub. And then I'm going to show you what I mean by unifying those marks, because right now I've got some vertical marks going on over here and I've got some vertical marks going on over there, but I don't have any on the top of my drawing. And as I get next to this table, I need to be kind of careful. I am going to have to probably put like a number 2 or 3 value on the table in order for you to see the 0 that's going to be along this edge. So I went another direction with my pencil in order to disguise those initial marks that I made. I actually went diagonal, and then I'm going to rub that value in, and I'm going to go another direction in the background, and again, it's going to help unify all those marks that I made. I went horizontal for a lot of it, but I'm going to go in different directions so that the value gets really blended in. And eventually I might even take my blending stump and try to get the very corners to be more blended than when I got them right now. And I'm probably going to switch or flip my paper around. That's just so that I can actually reach better where I'm trying to go with my pencil, and so that I don't make a mistake. So one other thing I want you guys to see really quickly, hopefully you can see how as I was working, this pencil got like very short. I don't want to let it get to where the wood is, because if I let the lead go all the way to the wood will actually scratch my paper and I'll never be able to make marks in it the same way again. It's the same thing if you actually erase too hard and the paper kind of starts to tear. The paper never really recovers from that, and it's really hard to fix errors if you don't use the right kind of material as you are drawing. And I am going to go back in here and just true up this edge a little bit before I go and do the vertical part, just to get it really nice and crisp or focused. So as long as my marks are unified, it's really good, and hopefully you guys can see what I'm talking about when we're talking about how shiny ebony pencil can get. It's really nice and dark, and I'm going to come a little bit closer. Hopefully I'll be able to let you see here if I rotate this a little bit, the fact that I went different directions. And actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to turn the light off for just a moment so that you can actually hopefully see what I'm talking about, and the fact that I went different directions in order to keep that whole part unified. And if I zoom in on my umbra, I didn't actually do that, so I'm going to have to go back in there eventually and unify the marks in my umbra. Now that I've got enough value in my background, I have a little bit of value on my tissue, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start adding value to my cylinder. And one other thing that I want you to notice, and I actually did just get value everywhere with my tissue, so I'm going to go back in here with the eraser, and I'm going to erase where I want to keep this super, super white. One of the things I want you guys to notice about the diagrams that we made for you is I put numbers on these, so it's almost like a draw by number, especially if you use that value scale that we created before, that it's numbered from 0 to 9. So the background is a 9. There's a repeated 9 in the umbra that actually gradually gets lighter. I put a 6 here. It might even be to a 7. And like hopefully as you see I add the values here in those number values, what it's going to do is it's going to look very cylindrical. This might not be the view that you have. You may have a different look to yours, so it's important to actually have a diagram that's similar to where you are seated. So for example, this person had the light source behind the cylinder and the zeros were at the top of the page, and the whole diagram is different than before, as is the shadow, because of where this individual is sitting in the room. So again, what I'm going to do here is grab a little bit of value from the background, and I'm going to start taking my tissue and I'm going to start adding value to the cylinder in different places. And I'm also going to add a little bit to the top part of the cylinder, and eventually what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to go back and erase parts or lift off the pencil in order to make the drawing look more focused. So for example, what I'm doing here is I'm rubbing in a circular pattern like we had done before, and I'm just going to add one layer of value, and that's already looking fairly cylindrical. However, it's hard to see from the table to the cylinder, and that's because I don't have any value on the table at all. Before I add that value, I'm actually going to turn my paper and I'm going to erase with a really nice sharp number 2 pencil eraser. I'm going to erase into here where I can see the number zeros are going to meet at a point. And the second time I erased, I actually am on the vertical part of the cylinder, and I'm going to erase along this edge, and then eventually I'm going to take a kneaded eraser and I'm going to go back in here. I do have to clean my kneaded eraser and make it like easy for me to use, so I'm technically ripping it apart here for you so that you can see that. And I'm going to squeeze it kind of into like a little bit of a point, and I'm just going to take and erase by pushing and twisting that eraser, and I didn't get quite enough off of there, so I'm going to have to do that a little bit more. And you're going to have to go back and forth because you're not going to be able to get all of the value off at once. I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to take my larger vinyl eraser. I happen to like the vinyl eraser a little bit more. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to erase this area until it just touches the other value that I created at a point. So hopefully you guys can kind of see how it sort of makes like an infinity symbol. I don't know if you see how the values, like they're supposed to touch at a point. So I've got a little problem in here that eventually I'm going to have to address. I don't want to do that right now though, because I'm going to have to add a lot more value to the side and to my table. And I'm going to have to probably do that several times, which is going to upset me. So I'm going to wait to do that until the end. I'm going to add more value to this. And I'm pulling my kneaded eraser apart because I actually can see an area in here. And I'm going to probably try to squeeze this into a little tiny section here. You could technically rip off a little section like this and have a smaller eraser if you wanted to. Eventually you'll be able to push that back together, but the kneaded eraser sometimes blends a little bit nicer than the vinyl eraser, but the vinyl eraser is actually going to get you that zero value that you want in some areas. So you kind of have to use both erasers in order to get the different values that you want. Now I'm going to go back in and I'm actually going to add a little bit of value to the side of my box, and part of the reason that I'm doing that is it's supposed to be a number 6 all the way over on the side, so I'm just going to add a little bit of pencil value in here, and then I'm going to take my tissue and I'm going to blend in a circular motion until I am satisfied with how smooth that value is. And I may have to go back in there a couple of times in order to get the kind of value I really want to see in here. And part of the problem with the tissue too is it's a little bit fatter than that blending stump. So if I take a blending stump, I can actually take a little bit of value from the background, and hopefully you can see. If I turn this, you can see where there's value on it and where there's not. I'm going to have to be very careful as I go in here, and I'm hardly touching the paper at all, in order to go back and add a little bit of value. And I'm going to turn this again because I want to get value right on this side right here. Oh, and I went just a little bit too dark there. I don't know if you can see that on the video. I went a little bit too dark, so I'm going to have to go back with my eraser and erase this part right here, because just this little spot right here is a little too dark, so I'll have to go back and just lift that back off. And this is what I mean by going back and forth. You're not necessarily going to get the exact value you want immediately. You may have to do it a couple of times in order to get it right. It's just like playing an instrument or doing some kind of sport. Sometimes it takes some effort to get the values where you want it to go. It takes some practice. So now I'm actually adding a little bit of value to the table in order to make the table show up. And if you'll notice on my diagram that I had, my table value should be a 4, and it should go almost to 0. It's going down to a 1 right on the corner, and then it's going to actually get darker as it goes away from the light again. And if you look at the table in the classroom, you should be able to see how it goes from darker to lighter in different areas of the table. If you can't see it, sometimes you have to squint, and if you still can't see it, then we're going to have to probably put the image into Photoshop in order to show you the different values that are within a photograph if you take a photograph of the cylinder with your phone. So now you can see I kind of have lost the penumbra, which is that lighter part of the shadow, as I was starting to add value into my background. And it's okay to lose, the back end of the shadow, but parts of this shadow should be more crisp. I just went and grabbed some more value from my background in order to add another layer of value into my drawing to make it look as smooth as possible. Another thing that I'm noticing over here is I may have gotten this a little bit too dark, but before I evaluate that, I'm actually going to go back and I'm going to erase into the edge of my cylinder to get the white to pop back off that corner. And I have to go really slow so that I don't make a mistake and erase into the table where I don't want to erase. So I'm going to go and erase in here, and then I'm actually going to blend that erased value into the side of the cylinder. So I'm going to take my kneaded eraser, and I'm going to go back in here, and I'm going to lift some of those values back off so that I've got a really nice blended area in my cylinder. And I could take a brand new tissue, or I can even sometimes use my finger, and I can blend that back out, and hopefully you can see it's really nice and smooth now compared to when I initially erased. It was a little bit rougher right there. So now I can definitely see the white edge of the cylinder against the table. I've got this really nice edge. It is not a line. I technically put value on here that disguised that initial outline. I made the outline disappear. As I try to do the penumbra, I'm going to very, very lightly touch the lines that I had for the penumbra, and I'm going to add a little bit more value with my ebony pencil in order to show the two shadows that show up because of how the light is hitting my object. So again, there's two shadows. This lighter shadow is called the penumbra, and the darker shadow is called the umbra, and it's the same kind of shadows that exist in outer space when the sun hits any of the planets. And I'm going to, again, take my tissue. I like the tissue the best. Sometimes I use the blending stump, but more often than not, I use the tissue and I use my fingers and a lot of the pencil eraser as well. So now you can actually see I've got two different shadows going on here. I'm going to add a little bit more value to this back side because it should actually get a little bit darker as it moves away from the cylinder. A lot of these areas, like right here, I'm going to stay as parallel to the original line that I drew, and I was staying parallel when I did any of the outlines for, or not the outlines, but when I started to add value, I went parallel to the original line that I drew. Over here in the shadow, it's actually okay if you cross it a little bit, because hopefully you notice on the table there that the shadow actually starts to like kind of get fuzzy on the edges. There might be some really straight areas, but it does get a little bit fuzzy as it comes off. So I'm going to actually blend that out a little bit in order to show that as well. And I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to add a little bit more value to my table so that the value from one side of the table to the other should match as well. And I'm just going to, again, I'm going to take a little bit more time to, oops, and I probably took some of that into my cylinder, so I'm going to have to go back in here and I'm going to have to erase a little bit. And I can also see that I need to go back in here and I'm probably going to take a number 2 pencil to put a little bit of value along this edge so I can see where I need to erase and where I'm going to leave. And I'm going to actually take a clean part of my tissue in order to smooth that out. And I could probably put a little bit more value in down here. I'm actually going to work back into my cylinder a little bit to true that up because I can see some areas like up here at the top. It kind of seems like it's starting to get fuzzy, and part of the reason for that is I didn't stay as parallel to the line up there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add a little bit more value here, and I'm probably going to go along that edge on the outside to add more value to the background eventually. And I'm going to go ahead and do that right now because it'll actually help true up this edge. That edge was kind of funky, so realistically the ellipse that's in here you should be able to divide it in half and in half again. And I can actually see over here I should really have to erase a little bit more, but I'm not going to be able to because I went so dark there. So I'm going to go against the background and I'm going to try to get this really nice and dark here so that I can see my cylinder from the background without much effort at all. And as I move this, I can see it's pretty good. I am going to go back in here with an eraser, and I'm going to erase right along this little edge because I can see it's hard for me to see the edge, the exact edge of where the cylinder is and where the vertical part of the cylinder meets the top of the cylinder. That's what I'm actually talking about here. And I'm going to have to go in here and I'm going to try to erase again to make those two light parts meet at an exact point. And partly, I also am going to have to take this eraser and I'm going to have to go inside here. This part right here is a little bit too dark on the vertical part of the cylinder, and so I'm just going to lift up the value off of there in order to make those two edges meet at more of a point. And I can see it separated just a little bit, so I'm going to take my blending stump and I'm going to go back in here and just very, very gently and very, very light is how I'm pressing here with my blending stump. And I'm going to add just a little bit more into this corner. And hopefully you can see now there's an edge, and it actually creates kind of like an arc. And hopefully you can see that arc as you're looking at the cylinder. Sometimes people can see it and other times they can't. You can, again, it's easier to see if you actually put that into Photoshop. I can actually see that my values got a little bit wacky here because I pressed a little bit too hard with my kneaded eraser. So I'm going to go back in there and really gently try to add values until I can see that it's this nice arc, but there aren't any breaks in the value. That's what I'm really looking for when I'm trying to create a value scale on a cylinder. The last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it this direction, and I'm actually going to go diagonal this time in order to create a little bit darker value on the back side of my cylinder back here. I do want to be able to see the cylinder from the shadow, so you have to be very careful how much value you actually add to the body of the cylinder, or the vertical part of the cylinder, because you don't want to lose the bottom corner to the umbra, or the darkest part of the cylinder, and you also don't want to lose the top part of the cylinder to the background. So you have to be able to see everything, and it's really important to just go slow as you're blending, because if you go across those lines or perpendicular to those lines, you're technically going to have a little bit of a problem trying to true up the edges eventually. So I did a pretty good job, but there's a couple of areas that I'm not totally happy with right now, and notice how I'm kind of leaving that little bit of an arc into the value as I'm working here, and part of the reason that I'm doing that is it's actually going to help the cylinder look more rounded as I'm doing that. And again, I am blending in a circular pattern. I'm going to stay away from that edge from the vertical part of the cylinder to the top, and part of the reason that I'm doing that, and I'm also staying away from this edge, I'm going to use my blending stump in a little bit to make those edges a lot nicer. And I might even go in with an eraser again, or I'm even thinking I'm probably going to take a number 2 pencil. It's a little bit fuzzy here. From the camera view that you have, it looks pretty crisp, but with my eyes, I can actually see there's a little bit of a fuzziness here. So I'm going to have to go back and fix that. And I'm probably going to use a number 2 pencil, a really sharp number 2 pencil, to go in there and fix that. I'll see if I can do it with the blending stump, but I think it's going to be better with a pencil. So again, I just added more value, and hopefully you can see it really goes from a 0 all the way to at least a number 5. Up in here, it's actually a number 6, and I should actually take that down. So I'm actually going to go another direction with my pencil, and I'm going to try to do that again. I am actually using the ebony pencil because I want to add more value, but really I should add the value down here because the lower part is what needs a little bit more value. And I do want... I'm kind of going in a very, not haphazard, but it's like I go in and out, and part of the reason I do that is it's much more natural to have something undulate, sort of like waves on the ocean, or if you think about how a river meanders, the value should go in and out. If you don't do that and you make it just look all like it was one big marker line, it's going to look much more forced and not natural. And we want our value to look really natural as we do different objects. It just makes it look that much nicer. So again, I'm taking my tissue and I'm blending this value in, and then I'm going to take my pencil and try to true up those edges. And that's actually a lot nicer. I got a little bit too dark right here, and I could go and erase that, but I think I wanna actually address this edge a little bit first. So I'm gonna go in here and I'm gonna do that edge really nicely. And then I'm going to also true up the edge of my shadow because I can actually see the shadow needs a little bit of work too. So I'm going to take that really sharpened pencil that I have and I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to create that really nice edge between the cylinder and the darkest part of the shadows, because I should be able to see the cylinder is actually lighter than the table right where the shadow meets the cylinder. So there I have my cylinder drawing. I've got a little bit of an issue over here. I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to actually try to erase just this little part in here, and then I'm going to take a tissue and probably have to blend it again, because sometimes when you use the blending or the kneaded eraser, what you'll notice is that it picks up in uneven areas, and then you have to go back and like smooth that back out so it looks nice. That's a little bit better, and I do have to go back in here. I'm going to take my blending stump, and this is like a really fine tuning of what I made here. I'm just going to go back in here to make sure that those dark edges meet so that you can see a definite difference between the top of the cylinder and between the side of the cylinder. And so hopefully you can see, if I turn this back over, now I've got a definite top, a definite side, I have a definite table, I've got the exact edges of where the umbra and penumbra are, and I did a pretty good job creating the value for my cylinder.